Well, welcome to this latest broadcast from the IEA London YouTube channel. My name is Mark Littlewood. I'm the Director General of the Institute of Economic Affairs here in Westminster. And I'm delighted to be joined again on the IEA London YouTube channel by my good friend, Patrick Basham. Patrick is the Director of the Democracy Institute in Washington, DC, a best-selling author, a media pundit, a pollster, a lecturer and a consultant. His main areas of focus are political and cultural trends, economic regulation, cryptocurrency and public health issues. And I should say Patrick has performed a great service for the IEA by being our go-to person to try and work out what the hell's happening on the other side of the pond. Patrick, great to have you back with us here on the IEA London YouTube channel. Welcome.
Thank you, Mark, for the generous introduction. Always a pleasure to be with you and your fine audience. Looking forward to the conversation.
So we want you to help us navigate what's occurred and is still indeed, as we're speaking at the moment, Patrick, unfolding in terms of the US midterm elections for the House of Representatives and the Senate. I should say at the time of recording, there are still a number of results in issue, and we'll come to those at the moment. But am I right in saying, Patrick, that there was a sort of broad expectation amongst pollsters and pundits that there was going to be a red wave, very confusing for our British viewers, that the more right-leaning party is in red and the more left-leaning party is in blue, completely the opposite way round to most European political colour schemes. But what seems to have emerged is that the Republican Party has done sort of okay, but has fallen below the expectations set of them 2 or 3 days ago, where the House of Representatives was expected to fall into their hands easily, and the Senate very, very probably. The House of Representatives will still fall into GOP hands, I believe, but the Senate, still too early to tell as votes are being counted. Is that right?
Yes. Now, I would say the answer to the question of was there a red wave, the answer is both yes and no. Our own polling, which for good or for ill is usually a little contrarian, this time it wasn't. So there were many pollsters like ourselves who saw the GOP winning the national congressional vote, which means the House vote, by 4, 5 or 6 points. We had it at 5 points. The exit polls came out and they said the Republicans win by 5 points. Now the exit polls are usually wrong. However, in this case, you look at the national vote, the popular vote, as it stands at the time we're talking. It's Republicans +6. Now, not all of the California votes are counted, and some others on the West Coast. So that's going to drop a bit, probably to 4 or 5. So we're going to end up with what, in popular vote terms, in conventional wisdom would normally agree, is a red wave. The Democrats won by over 3 points in 2020 in terms of the House races, right? So that's over an 8-point swing, it looks like, somewhere between 7 and 9, probably around 8. It's a massive swing. And that swing would historically, as recently as 2020, give you a very large Republican gain in terms of seats, right? And this is where the no part of the answer comes in, because everyone is overlooking the popular vote swing because the seat allocation did not meet the projections. The Republicans in 2020, they gained a dozen seats, even though they lost the popular vote by 3 points because their vote is always more efficient. That didn't happen this time. It's the first time ever. So the Republicans are only up about 15 now. They probably end up something like 18 to 20 net gain, which will give them a modest majority in the House. So this is what's strange this time. The popular vote and the seat allocation is not matching what has always, been the dynamic, the relationship. On the Senate side, most projections were for a small Republican majority, somewhere between 51 and 54. Right now, the Republicans have 49. They need to win at least 2 of the outstanding 3 seats to be decided, or if they win all 3, they'll get 52 seats. The Democrats only need 1 because the Vice President, Kamala Harris, would break every tie in the Senate. Right now, it looks as if the Republicans will win the Nevada Senate race. It's going to be very close in Arizona. I expect that they'll narrowly win that. And then the last seat to be allocated will be next month in Georgia, where there's a mandatory runoff. And the incumbent, in this case, the Democrat, the incumbent in Georgia has never won a Senate runoff. And I think the Republicans are likely to win that one too.
Well, thanks. That gives us the sort of party political picture, Patrick. I should obviously do the usual i.e. disclaimer, we're not directly involved in electoral partisan politics, but obviously we observe it because it sets the landscape and the petri dish in which different ideas might emerge and flourish. And so what were the driving forces in the American electorate? Is it that old James Carville phrase, it's the economy stupid? And what is the prevailing economic position in the States? And has that driven people away from the incumbent Democratic administration, if you like? And if so, should that be of cheer to those of us of a free market disposition? Or are there a whole range of other issues at play here? How much, because this is, I think, increasingly a feature of UK politics as well, are cultural issues a dominant driving force of voter preference rather than what you and I would have been used to 10, 20, 30 years ago, of it really being economic issues being the overriding driving force that determines which political party people might vote for?
Well, the short answer, Mark, is yes to all of the above. James Carville was right in 1992 with Clinton, and his mantra is correct in 2022. All year, it's been a pocketbook election. It's been principally, for most voters, about the economy, more specifically, or more focused upon inflation, petrol, gas prices. That's been the dominant theme in terms of what people are worried about. Falling real wages, jobs, the fact that so many people are having to work 2 or 3 jobs. So that has dominated everything. But there are 2 or 3 other issues which have also been very important, and in some cases more important than the economy to some subsets of the electorate. Now, those have principally been crime. You have skyrocketing violent crime rates, and not just in American cities, but right across the country. This is not brand new. This has been going on for a couple of years now. So that's become very important. Illegal immigration, the quote unquote invasion at the southern border, that's very important to many voters. And education has become important. But this is where we get into the culture wars, and this is where things have flipped in partisan terms, because traditionally education, like healthcare, is an issue that works to the Democrats' advantage. They sort of have default inherent advantage on those issues with most voters. Not this time, because the reason there's a renewed focus on education is because the progressive left of the Democratic Party in recent years, but especially right now, have been pushing, promoting, and implementing, whether it's critical race theory or transgender policies, which are massively unpopular across the board, except with your most hardcore Democrats. So those issues, education, illegal immigration, crime, and the economy, have dominated. And that is why the popular vote projections have been correct, because those were the issues that were either hardening the Trump Republican vote or moving independents and moderate Democrats to the Republican side.
That's really interesting. I mean, obviously a substantial piece of coverage on this side of the pond of controversy in American politics has been around the Supreme Court overturning Roe versus Wade. It's intriguing, I guess, for us on this side of the Atlantic that a good number of issues which are highly controversial in the States are, for better or for ill, not hugely controversial issues here, not vote movers in the United Kingdom, or as far as I'm aware, across the rest of Western Europe. Has the abortion issue been a big driver? I know there's been on ballots in a number of states referendums on what individual state approaches should be to abortion, from a more sort of should the right to an abortion be enshrined in law to should it be wholly prohibited. Has that been a factor in whether people have voted for the Democrats or the Republicans in the midterm elections, though?
Overall, it's been a wash, Mark. The media and the Democrats, both during the campaign and since the election, have stressed that the Democrats prospectively were going to do better than expected because of the issue, and that they did better than expected because of the issue. There just isn't any evidence to back that up. It's not that America isn't a overall, in crude terms, a pro-choice country, and if you had a national referendum on that issue, abortion rights would win in some form. It's the fact that the issue of abortion, there are comparatively few single issue voters on that. They make a lot of noise on both sides, but there aren't many. And how it breaks down is this: on the pro-choice side, those who are single issue pro-choice voters are all Democrats, and they are always vote, right? And they were always going to vote, and they did vote. On the pro-life side, the single issue voters are overwhelmingly, like 90%, they vote Republican, but they don't always vote. They only show up, often only show up when they think the issue is, is in the moment. It might even literally be on the ballot or could be soon. And so the Republicans in net terms tend to get a bump if abortion is being talked about. And I mean, obviously post the Supreme Court decision, it very much is. We always thought, and I think it was a wash, if you look at the most pro-choice states in terms of popular opinion, like California, New York, Illinois, that's actually where the Republicans did better in the popular vote. Where the Democrats did better than expected, it was in the Midwestern states and some others further south, where actually voters tend to be a little more pro-life than on the two coasts. So it's a classic case of there was a narrative, the narrative is being maintained, but the data just doesn't back it up.
Well, Patrick, thanks. That's a really useful insight into the sort of psephology, the electoral math. I want to really focus on the economy part. We are the Institute of Economic Affairs. You've mentioned already a number of problems in the UK, in the US economy, not dissimilar, I think, to the sort of issues that are being faced right across the Western world in terms of cost of living squeeze, real wages being disappointing in terms of uplift, high inflation, and all of the rest of it. Is there a shift in a market-orientated direction there, or is this just a sort of, when people aren't feeling good, they tend to kick out at the incumbent, or is there something more at play here? What has the Biden plan been to try and deal with this? My understanding is it's been huge amounts of state spending. Is this what's sort of coming to the fore, or is it just a cri de coeur, a scream that people are dissatisfied with their living conditions? Or are they reaching out for more market-orientated solutions? I don't know, lower taxes, reining in government spending, some deregulation rather than yet more red tape coming out of Washington, D.C. What are the actual policy differences here, rather than just what people are, rather than just the fury or anger or disappointment that people might be feeling inside?
Well, while, Mark, there's definitely been that traditional classic reaction against a failing administration, a failing government, regardless of their stripe or the ideological hue. The fact that the Biden administration has doubled down on the spending, it's, their policy is being tax and spend, more regulation, and what for the average person is not necessarily an ideological battle, or an ideological question in their minds. What most voters have concluded is that all of that spending, all of that debt, I mean, over 31 trillion now US dollars, right? All of that has not delivered the prosperity that was promised. The economy is technically, I think most people would agree, in or about to go into recession. Inflation is the highest for 40 years, falling real wages, all of these things. They're not unique problems unique to the US, but they're certainly very strong here. And the average voter has concluded that even if it was, quote unquote, worth a try a couple of years ago, it has failed. There is just simply too much money being printed and borrowed by the government. Taxes are too high. Disposable income is disappearing. The average person's assets are in the stock market and in their house, and both of them are going downhill rather rapidly. So, as is often the case, perversely, in public policy, if a policy is bad or a set of policies are bad, they have to get the outcomes, the obvious impacts, the consequences have to be so poor, get to such a degree that most people finally get it. And they start to connect the dots between the policy prescriptions, the policy instruments, and the actual outcomes. That has started to happen in America. So it's not as if, unfortunately, most Americans suddenly want to, grab a libertarian free market flag and run with it. But they do now recognize that government in America is too big, too onerous, too interventionist, and they are receptive, I think now for the first time in a number of years, to a more limited government set of proposals. The question is, will they get them? Because the Republicans in this election, although they successfully stayed out of their own way, they perhaps missed an opportunity to, in addition to being negative about the incumbent party, to actually be positive and prescriptive about what alternatives they would put forward. Because the American electorate is open now in a way it wasn't under, say, Obama or even under Trump, to a more limited government, free market approach.
That's fascinating, Patrick. And which politicians in America should we be looking to who are articulating that? I mean, I only have an impressionistic view, really, of sort of staying up into the wee small hours and watching events unfold, and you hear sort of victory speeches and concession speeches. And they tend to be a bit more like watching the Oscars, really, rather than, you know, they thank their campaign team and their wives and their children and their producers and all of that sort of stuff. They don't tend to articulate much of a policy vision. So which Republicans, or for that matter, any politicians in the United States of America should IEA-inclined people be looking towards who are articulating a kind of plan for less intervention by the federal government, a freer market, more money in people's pockets, lower tax rates, and reining in the state, and I think, as former President Trump said, sort of draining the swamp in terms of the regulatory agencies that have become so pervasive in economic life?
Well, on the Democratic side, it's very bad news. A generation ago, there were moderate, even quote unquote conservative Democrats on fiscal and economic issues. They're all gone now, at least in terms of federal politics. Everyone is of the left or mouths and votes along those lines. On the Republican side, I mean, there are rays of light, rays of hope. In the Senate, you have Rand Paul, you have Mike Lee. There are a number like that, and we're going to have, if Blake Masters wins this close race in Arizona, his financial political patron is Peter Thiel, and they both have a strong libertarian bent to their thinking. You have in the House, you have people like Thomas Massey. So you have some free market, classical liberal, libertarian-minded politicians. There will be, when all is said and done, there will be a few more in the House. There'll be a few more in the Senate. And this is important. It's important anyway, but it's important given the Republicans will have the House, and I expect they'll have the Senate. It means that not only will the Republicans be able to stop the madness from continuing from the Democrats, from the White House and from in Congress, but they'll actually be able to put forward alternative policies. Now, they won't have a massive likelihood of probability of success, because Biden will be able to veto anything that comes out of the U.S. Congress. However, they will be able to begin and hopefully continue for the best part of 2 years to articulate those policies and the rationale behind them, so that the American people will begin to receive, for the first time in a number of years, a coherent and cohesive and articulated rationale for why and how there is a different way of looking at the role of government in the American economy.
Patrick, that's very interesting. And perhaps you can also help me and our audience on understanding what the immediate impact is of the Republicans taking the House of Representatives. I mean, does this effectively mean that the Biden plan, can't survive this anymore? That we've now got these checks and balances for which the U.S. Constitution is famous, but when the Senate, by the Vice President's casting vote, and the House of Representatives were in the same hands as Joe Biden's party, well, he could roll forward all these Keynesian plans and bailouts and huge expenditure at federal level. Is that now cut off at the knees simply because the Republicans have the House of Representatives? And if so, does it actually matter very much who controls the Senate? Isn't the Republicans having a majority in the House of Representatives sufficient to basically be a block on future Biden plans? And whether the Senate is 51-49 or 50-50 or 49-51, does it matter very much?
Well, if one's goal is exclusively to stop Biden and the Democrats from furthering their legislative agenda on the environment, tax, spending, etc., then you've got what you need, because the House is where the tax legislation begins. It's where basically that's where they own the financial side of government, and so nothing will get. It looks like nothing will get through that the Republicans don't want. Hopefully, they'll only want good things, and they won't go along with bad things. So that's definitely good news. Where I think the Senate is important, it's important in two ways. One, if the Republicans do propose good legislation, they pass it in the House, if they have the Senate, they will, with a narrow majority, be able to pass it there too, one would assume. That means that Biden has to veto it. And if Biden vetoes it, then publicly, if the Republicans have any capability at all in terms of the public debate and narrative, then that brings forth into the public space the conflict or the contrast between the two approaches. Hopefully one a little more pro-free market. We know the other one is very much pro-big government. So there's also the issue, there's two other issues. One is foreign policy, which the Senate tends to own, and trade deals and all of that. So whether you're looking for a more free trade approach, less protectionist, you focus on the Senate, with someone like Rand Paul would be very good, Mike Lee as well, I would suggest. Or if you think, as increasingly Americans do, that whatever the rights and wrongs of Ukraine and Russia in that conflict, that America cannot financially afford to be in it much longer, that's where most of the action will be, because Congress can turn off the tap in terms of the Ukraine war, and we don't know how that will go because the Republicans are quite divided. The other area, one area we can guarantee there will be action, is definitely out of the House and probably the Senate as well, will be investigations and inquiries. So the Republicans, so Rand Paul, for example, he'll be chairman of the Health Committee in the Senate. He's going to launch an investigation into how COVID was handled. In the House, they're going to launch investigations into Hunter Biden's laptop, alleged corruption of the Biden family, and arguably most importantly, investigations into how the Justice Department, but specifically the FBI, have been politicized and how they've been turned into weapons to be used against, the Republicans will argue, Biden and the Democrats' political partisan opponents. So there'll be lots of action, lots of fury, lots of noise, but there won't actually be much legislative accomplishment or legislative change. But everything will, of course, is America, it's politics, be about setting the stage for the 2024 elections.
Well, that's exactly what I wanted to come on to, because I'd be interested in your thoughts about what these midterms mean for 2024. Actually, on both sides of the aisle, Joe Biden, rather, I think, lacking complete clarity, seems to be suggesting, winking to the fact that his present intention is that he'd run again. I think he'd be 80, am I right, at the time of the next election? So we don't know whether the president will seek a second term himself. On the Republican side of the ledger, I guess most of the focus has been around Donald Trump, perhaps announcing, perhaps in just a few days' time, that he intends to run for re-election. And the governor of Florida, Ron DeSantis, who I think was seen to have a very good result. He was re-elected by a margin of about 20% in what is historically considered to be a very marginal purple state, which could flip either way. What should free marketeers make of Trump, DeSantis, or indeed any other runners and riders who might feasibly emerge as president of the United States in 2024? Again, without being partisan, but which sort of candidates should free marketeers be cheering on or wishing to do well because they're articulating a free market vision for America?
Well, it's I mean, it's hard not to be cynical, isn't it, across the board? But I mean, the glass half empty part is, you might say, the easiest part. You have basically the Democratic incumbents and any who might replace or attempt to replace Biden or Harris on the top of the Democratic ticket. You know, their status, in the old-fashioned sense, you'd say they are at best social democrats, and they seem to be running very quickly to a harder socialist line, certainly on economics. So it's pretty much bad news across the board, unless they come up with, which may be one of the only ways they could, I think, win the next presidential election. They come up with an out of left field, no pun intended, candidate who might be from the business world and might be a little more commonsensical on economic issues. The glass half full is to look at the Republican side and say that Trump, his populist instincts lead him to, as they did previously, to oppose much of the madness that happens to come from the Democrats when they're in power. But of course, he has protectionist tendencies. He has a very strong deregulatory tendency. He did a lot of good work on that front, which has, you know, gone largely not uncommented on. But you know, he's okay with a decent sized government as long as it works well, I think he would say, rather than have some innate desire to shrink government massively. So it's a question, I think, of who's with Trump. He could move one way or the other depending on his advisors, his vice president, etc. The rest of the potential Republican field, most of it is probably promising from a free market point of view. I mean, Ron DeSantis is the obvious person. If it isn't Trump, at the moment, it looks like it would be DeSantis, or they could form a powerful ticket. Now, DeSantis, we don't know really anything about him on foreign policy. He was a congressman. He's now a governor. But his record as a governor, is pretty encouraging. He's run Florida in a pretty sane way from a limited government free market point of view, given that we're in 2022 and not in 1922. And I would think that if he was, say, Trump's vice president, that he would not only have a great deal of influence on domestic policy, but I think he would be someone who would be always attempting to move Trump or ensure that he remained on that side of any particular argument. And then, there are other potential candidates who are likely to be that way. I mean, it's possible Rand Paul might run again, right? As he did in 2016. I mean, he's going to articulate what in American terms would be a quite limited government perspective. And as I was saying earlier, Mark, the voters are more receptive to such an argument now than they were. And as the Republicans will be competing with an incumbent party, if perhaps President, if Biden is the candidate again, the degree of difficulty, the bar will be lower in terms of making that argument, because if times continue to be tough economically, the Republicans don't have to prove they're right. They simply have to be persuasive about the notion that they could be right. And after all, things are so bad now, why not try something a little different? They didn't do, I think, quite enough of that in these elections, but in 2024, Trump or DeSantis or someone else who is genuinely committed to shrinking or at least halting the growth, that would be a start, halting the growth of the federal government, and perhaps attempting to shrink it, they would have a better chance than, say, Trump would have done in 2020, to make the case that we can actually look at a world where the government does a little bit less and is a little bit less involved in our economic lives.
Can I press you a bit more on Governor DeSantis? Obviously, Donald Trump will be well known to all of our audience, and they probably have already drawn their conclusions about him for good or for ill. DeSantis is a less known figure, but he features on the front page of many British newspapers this week, is being touted by a number of pundits as the future of the Republican Party. I know you've had a column in the Express, Patrick, suggesting that there might be a Trump-DeSantis ticket. We'll make sure there's a link to that in the show notes below. Alistair Heath this week has written in the Telegraph that he suspects these results might herald the end of the Trump era and that DeSantis is the future. I think there was a US newspaper that described the governor as the future rather than DeSantis. What are we to make of him? Because you mentioned his record in Florida might appeal to free market leaning people. I'm still a bit betwixt and between. My understanding is over lockdowns, he took a rather less authoritarian approach in Florida than was taken in much of the rest of the country, and seems to have been a sensible approach to take in terms of the Florida economy, and without, as far as I'm aware, but correct me if I'm wrong, an overwhelming of the health system or some such like. So I guess libertarian-leaning people might rather praise the governor of Florida for that. On the other side, and this is one where I'm more betwixt and between, but if you listen to his victory speech, DeSantis channeled Winston Churchill and sort of said, we will fight the woke people on the beaches, and we'll fight them in the corporations, and we'll fight them in the schools, and we will never surrender to the woke agenda. Always a rather difficult thing to nail down. But of course, he's also been somewhat at war with the Disney Corporation in Florida, if I understand it. And again, this was an area where I was a bit betwixt and between. On the one hand, you might think that some of the statements coming out from the Disney Corporation didn't make a great deal of sense, or might even find them offensive. On the other hand, the Disney Corporation is a private company. Shouldn't they be able to articulate their own political views? And DeSantis, I think I'm right in saying, was toying with the idea of removing the sort of tax-exempt status that was granted to the Disney Corporation when they agreed to locate all these huge amusement parks in Kissimmee near Orlando in Florida. Not obvious to me that I would see DeSantis as a kind of free market libertarian leaning person. On some areas like lockdown seems to be. jacking up taxes on one of the most important employers in your state because you don't like what they're saying about an education bill? Bit more populist, isn't it?
Yes. I mean, the short answer, the crude answer on DeSantis is that if you're a Democrat, he looks quite free market. If you're a libertarian, he looks, well, sort of moderately fiscally conservative, right? Now, in terms of DeSantis himself, right? So here we have someone, he's a military veteran, US Navy, I think. I may be wrong about that. So congressman, he wins in 2018, a very tight race. The polls said he was going to lose to the liberal Democrat. He pulls it out. Largely because of the influence of Trump on that campaign. And what we learned there was, it's gotten overlooked now because DeSantis has been a successful governor of Florida, and the trends are such, the demographic trends are such that they've now made Florida a safe red Republican seat. Is that DeSantis? He's a bright guy, he's a competent guy, and he's a tough guy and a straight shooter. He's not yet demonstrated that he's a brilliant marketer or communicator. It's not that he's bad, but he's not great. And that's one of the reasons there might be a ceiling on his appeal. But you're absolutely right, Mark. The lockdowns and his response to the lockdowns, particularly a few months in, is what really put him on the spotlight on the right in America. So Florida came out of the lockdowns much quicker than anybody else, said, look, this is madness. We need to get back to work. We need to get back to life. We're going to do what's necessary to prevent a true health epidemic. Otherwise, Florida's open for business. And guess what? It worked brilliantly, right? And people are flooding to Florida from the likes of New York and California, New Jersey. Low taxes, pro-business environment, sensible public health policies. And so DeSantis is seen as a very successful governor, hence his 20-point win. And as you say, his campaign against wokeness has been the other piece of the puzzle for him to get prominence and support nationally amongst Republicans and conservatives and to get the media's attention. So what he has done is taken a major page out of Trump's book. Trump's appeal was always not exclusively, but in large part, and remains, because he appeared to be the first Republican who was willing on the national stage to stand up to the media, stand up to the Democrats, and stand up to what most people on the right would consider simply the insanity and the madness, particularly on the cultural issues. DeSantis, whether it's his own design or whether he simply has modeled himself on Trump, he has done the same thing. So he goes right back at the media. He goes right back at the woke crowd, whether they're in business or in the academy. And he does it. The good news for him is he does it very effectively, but he does it without the sharp elbows of Trump and without the what some people would view as sort of the egotism, the narcissism. So he might, he's sort of the thinking man's Trump, right? Or the sophisticated person's Trump. This is all very, very helpful. But when you get beyond Florida, Florida used to be viewed as a microcosm of the country because there is so much variety. It is so heterogeneous in so many ways, linguistically, ethnically, and it was politically. Florida's less of a microcosm now. And so the question is, can DeSantis sell across the country the way he sells in his state? And the jury's out because his appeal primarily is to middle-class folks, not just Republicans, but moderate Democrats, etc. Now, that used to win a presidential election for the Republicans, but they found out with the McCains and the Romneys, it wasn't the case anymore. They need to dominate the working class vote because the Democrats dominate the upper class and a good chunk of the middle class vote. That's Trump's genius, right? That's how he wins. The question is, can DeSantis get those blue collar, quote unquote, deplorables to vote for him? And that is where it gets tricky. And this is why Trump, in my opinion, remains the strongest, as of today, the strongest presidential candidate for the Republicans, because he can deliver the vote they must have to win. But I think, as you indicated, as I've written, Mark, I believe that a ticket between the two is the obvious solution. It's to their mutual benefit because Trump can only serve one more term if he's elected again, and DeSantis would be the president in waiting.
That's fascinating. I do need to ask you, Patrick. In fact, I ask increasingly asking this question of my American friends. We're talking, well, I mean, near as damn it, 2 days after polls have closed. as we've already mentioned at the time of broadcast, there are a number of close races we don't know the results of. Why does it take you so damn long to count votes in America? In a UK general election, it's all done within 5 or 6 hours. Okay, there might be one or two rather far-flung constituencies like the Orkneys or something that takes a bit of time to come in. But this is extraordinary. Why can't you guys in America count an election in a single night? Why are we still umming and ahhing 2 days later about the fate of the result in Arizona, Nevada, or elsewhere?
No, this is making America the laughing stock of the world, clearly and correctly. I think there's 3 reasons, Mark. The first one is the dominance of the quote-unquote expert and professional technical class. The technocrats a number of years ago decided that we should, as in most areas of policy, overthink things, right? We needed to bring the elections to the 21st century. So we must have all this technology, all these electronic voting machines, all this sort of stuff. So we've overthought it to the point where it no longer works. So it certainly can't work in an efficient and rapid and transparent way. So there's that problem. Then there's sheer incompetence. Let's be sure. Let's hope it's simply incompetence. You have a situation, the Arizona vote, right? We have the governor's race on unknown outcome, the senatorial race, and a lot of attorney general is other important things. One of the most important states in the country right now in American politics. They've had 2 years since the last election to get everything right. One on voting day in the largest county within which Phoenix is located, Maricopa County, 1/5 of the electronic voting machines in Republican districts didn't work. Now, coincidentally, the lady, Katie Hobbs, the lady running to be the Arizona governor on the Democratic side, is the Secretary of State of Arizona. That means her day job is to administer elections. And she actually perversely was engaged in a real-time job audition or interview with her voters for a better, higher position, the US Senate, while she was clearly failing her day job, right? So how is she in this conflict of interest position in the first place? But how does this happen? And the other reason is the more cynical one that some of us would suggest there is some evidence to back it up, which is that this is part of a sort of a legal, you might say, legal plan to ensure that as many votes are procured as possible. You have, the mail-in balloting, which was always meant, as it still is in Europe or in Canada, as an emergency measure for people who really can't get to the polls. But now it's how, in many states, most people, in some cases, all people vote. It might be mandated to be this way, right? In California or Oregon. And so the election season goes on for days and weeks. And guess what? Surprise, surprise, the counting goes for days and weeks. So you have, in, say, Nevada, coincidentally, one of the other 3 states where the outcome is unknown, the rules are you can count. In fact, you're going to count for 4 days. It's simply a given. In Pennsylvania, there was a legal effort so that none of the mail-in ballots that were dated after Election Day or were undated would be counted. That was given a thumbs up, and everybody thought, okay, that will help contain things. Oh no, a judge came in on election morning and said, no, I'm going to override that. Anything that comes in the mail by Friday, whether it's postmarked or not, we're going to count. So if you take away the safeguards and the guardrails and you loosen all the rules, it doesn't guarantee corruption. It doesn't guarantee that corruption was the point of it. But what it does is it opens us up to, at a minimum, a situation, a scenario that we're living and breathing right now, where there's an unknown number of ballots out there. It's not known when they'll all be received, and it's not known how long they'll take to count. And I think we are close to reaching a critical mass in terms of public opinion about how we can continue to do this. Because again, putting all nefariousness, notions of conspiracies aside, it's just incredibly inefficient. And it's reputationally absolutely, a killer, not just domestically, but internationally.
Patrick, we're about clean out of time, but let me finish by asking you, what should American watchers look for next? The midterms are out of the way. You've mentioned there's going to be a runoff in Georgia, obviously, in December, but people's attention is now going to be turned to the next presidency. Still a long way away before that vote happens, 2 years away, but what should we be expecting next? Are we going to start to see firm announcements from candidates in the next few days, or is that months away? When will the intentions of the incumbent President Joe Biden become clearer? What do you expect to say unfold between now and the end of 2022?
It looks like Trump will announce on the 15th. If not legally, he will publicly announce he's a candidate. That, of course, will then make it much easier for other potential Republican candidates to decide whether they want to go up against, the big gorilla. And it will help DeSantis decide. I think DeSantis has already decided that if Trump runs, he won't. So I think counterintuitively, it might be cleaner and easier on the Republican side, which is unusual when they're the opposition party. Where it gets interesting, very interesting, is on the Democratic side. The expectations were that the Republicans did incredibly well in terms of seats in both the Senate and the House, that Biden might be pushed aside. The dilemma, they obviously didn't do as well as they'd hoped, and the Democrats did better. So Biden can claim, well, every president does fairly poorly in a first term, midterm, which is true. I've still got it. The dilemma for the Democrats, though, is if they push Biden aside at some point, his replacement is not a fresh, popular face with persuasive skills. It's Kamala Harris, who's much less popular, even more unpopular than him, as are the Hillary Clintons and the other potential replacement successors to Biden. So they have a really tough decision to make. Do they push Biden or not? And if they do, who's next? So, my unsolicited, free advice to the Democrats is what you need to do is you need to get rid of Harris first. You have to drag her kicking and screaming out. Get rid of her first so that when you push Biden out, you're the guy or gal you want to be president, you want to be the next candidate for the Democrats, is already VP, and they move up immediately. Of course, much easier said than done. But outside of that, I don't see how they go into 2024, whether it's Biden or Harris or the identical ticket is 2020, with a obviously successful ticket, given that the economy is unlikely to be better. In fact, it may be worse.
Patrick, thank you so much for your expert insight yet again on the IEA London YouTube channel. We're greatly in your debt. You've given us a very thorough overview of what's happening in the United States of America, which is so important to all of us right across the world, but probably especially important to those of us in the United Kingdom. And indeed, I guess it's fair to say, some crumbs of comfort for those of us of a free market persuasion that things in America, perhaps, just perhaps, might shift somewhat in our direction in the years ahead. Patrick, it's been a real pleasure. Thanks again for joining us.
Thank you, Mark. My pleasure indeed.
Thanks to all of you for watching. If you've enjoyed this video, please do hit the thumbs up button below. And if you're not yet subscribed to the IEA London YouTube channel, please hit the red subscribe button and the notification bell. That way you'll be kept abreast of all of our upcoming video content. Tons of it comes out on a near daily basis. So that will keep you abreast of all of our films and podcasts. I hope you've enjoyed this discussion with Patrick Basham. Over and out. Have a good day. Well, if you enjoyed that conversation, why not watch one of these other videos? And while you're here, remember to hit the subscribe button and the notification bell. That way, you'll never miss out on a single IEA broadcast.